Hello and welcome to this beard clipper video. In this video I'm going to make some terrain out of packing materials which I've saved from a little toy that I put together for Rosie at Christmas. It's kind of a recycling video if you will, to show you some of the things that you can do with very basic materials and just how good, hopefully, it will turn out. So let's have a look and see what it is I've got and work out what we're going to make. Here we are. So what we have here is a cardboard box, and these are some really strong cardboard right angles. So that's quite inspiring there. We have a little bit more cardboard here as well. And over here we have different sizes and thicknesses of white foam, which is horrible to work with. You can see it's already been damaged just while I've been handling it. So yeah, that's not my perfect and my preferred material. However, that's not what this is about. This is about making something from recycled materials that you've not bought for the purpose. So just to say, what I'll be doing is only using these materials, and I will be using some other things like grout and paint and glue, obviously those sorts of materials for gluing together and for finishing, but the actual structure is going to be from what you see here. And I might make more than one thing, I'm not sure. I'm currently staring at this and having some ideas and inspiration. So let me explain my initial thoughts. There's a guy, I don't know, or girl, I don't even know whether it's a guy or a girl, it doesn't matter, on Instagram, who has been doing some fantastic stuff, and I can't remember their name, so I'll try to remember it and I'll pop that link to them if I do in the description and on the screen. But if I don't remember, then huge apologies, and maybe someone can point me in their direction. But they're doing some really cool kind of like curved terrain, so the roofs are curved and there's more soft and smoother shapes. And I don't know if you've noticed, but most of my terrain is very 90 degrees and very squared off and rigid, and I think that what I'd like to do on this, notwithstanding the fact that I've got these 90-degree shapes, which I do have an idea for, is to do something which is a little more organic, a little more kind of curved and bendy. And you can see that this is so soft that I can bend it. And therefore I will be able to do something maybe like some sloping roofs or something, maybe some Swiss chalet style is what I'm thinking. So that's where my mind is at the moment. But I'm going to sit down, going to do some plans, and I'll bring you back when I've worked out what I'm going to make with the first item of terrain, and I think I might do two, but I'm not sure. But the first one is probably going to be a kind of Swiss style chalet type. On with this, making use of the waste materials from that from the presents. What we've got here is a bit of a template that I've just drawn out. I actually used this is an old bit of cardboard that I saved from something else, but it still is waste. This is the shape of the roof that I want, as I've described. And if you can see here, we've also got roughly where the walls are going to be. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to make use of this thicker bit of polystyrene that I've got here to do a few of these templates, which I'll do using the hot wire cutter so that I get a good smooth cut. So I'm about to start basically marking out the cuts, and marking out using the template like this where I'm going to want the cuts to be. And when I cut these out, I will have maybe 4 or 5 of them, and I'll be able to use them to shape the other polystyrene around and get a good solid base. I have decided pretty much that I'm not going to have this as enterable. It's just going to be potentially a backdrop in photographs or something which will just be a line of sight blocker. So I'll go along, I'm going to do those, mark that template out everywhere in the along the maybe 4 or 5 of these, as I say, cut it out using the hot wire cutter, and I'll show you how I do that when I get to it. I've cut 4 of those templates out using my Proxon, and I've also trimmed off a length of the bendy polystyrene which I'll be using for the roof. And as you can see in the background, I have a hot glue gun. It's warming up at the moment. It is a cool hot glue gun because this is obviously very thin polystyrene, but I think that's probably the only way I'm going to be able to do it, because what I need to do, if you can see there, is actually glue it in place and bend it. And I can't get a clamp to hold it, so I can't use my gator glue, which is my preferred option. So I'm going to have to try with the hot glue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue each of these forms, one at each end and then two in the middle, just to hold that shape. And I'll do that on one side, and then I'll cut and glue the other side. And I think that's probably where I'm going to wrap it for today. I'm then going to think about how I'm going to move on from there. But at least I've made some progress. I'm very pleased. So what I'll do is, when that hot glue gun is warmed up, I will turn the camera back on and show you how I go about doing the actual gluing. This is warmed up now, so let's see how much of a failure this is. I'm hoping it's going to work. So we're going to run a nice big bead of hot glue all the way down the edge of this, right to the bottom, and then we will grab our bit of polystyrene, match it at the top. No, I didn't want it to be right at the end, idiot. There we are, match it at the top and press it down and into place, like that. Oh my goodness, it might even work. I'll just hold that in for a bit while that all goes off. There we are. So I'll do that for the rest now, and like I say, and then come along and do the other side, and then I'll come back at the end of the evening and show you exactly what it looks like. But that's going to work, that with the hot glue gun. Good, that's a relief. I was looking at it going, how am I going to get that bend to stay? But yes, a hot glue gun is going to work. There we are, brilliant. Well, there we are, that was more successful than I expected, and I've had some better ideas. So I think this is just going to be a removable roof. And what I'll do is I will build a underneath that will run along. I might make this solid. I might put a base on the bottom of it to make it solid, just to give it a little bit more structural integrity. But yeah, the hot glue has worked, I think, and the shape is exactly what I was looking for, that kind of curved roof shape. And I might be able to build myself like a great house underneath it or something, which, yeah, is going to look really cool. And I'm very happy to be making use of this waste material anyway. So that's me for now. I think I'm going to call that a good bit of progress. I need to finish up the vlog as well, so it's good to stop this now. This will be the last thing in the vlog, I think. So yeah, let's wrap that there, and I'll be back with this build when I do the next step, whatever that is, when I've had a bit of a thought about what my next step will be. The next step on this is going to be the walls. So I've got this packing material here, which I'm going to use to build some walls. I'm not going to use, obviously, the whole height, because that would be crazy. So, but however, what I am going to do is I'm going to cut that with the hot wire cutter, and then trim probably 5 centimetre high walls at most. I want it to be quite a low wall building with a really high ceiling. That's the image I'm going for. And then I'm going to stick it on. And I am going to do this so the roof doesn't come off, I've decided. So what I will also do is cut a length to go between. So I will get that done now with the hot wire cutter, hot glue it in place, and then bring you back when I come to the next step after that, which will be detailing, which is what's going to be a lot more interesting than just gluing bits of polystyrene together. That's glued nicely and very strongly, and what I've just decided to do is I would like to have a chimney, a relatively tall chimney, I think. So what I'm going to do is just cut down one of these pieces with the Proxon that you can see here. Sorry for the scrape. And I will shape it in and glue it in later, but just while the Proxon's out, because I'm going to put it away now, I will cut that down. There we are. Nice and simple like that. So I'll be able to then position that here when I do the roof and stick it in place, and it will look really, really cool. So that's good. Right, I'm going to tidy up. I'm going to get my cardboard together, and we're going to start to detail the outside of the building now. Okay, first of all, just to say that I'll be using this cardboard here as the base. So I've just sat it on it to make sure it's going to be right, and I'll be clamping that to something hard to make sure that it doesn't warp like I've done before. So that's what that is. Secondly, I'm going to be covering all of this with either a grout mixture or with some filler of some sort to make it more solid. I haven't yet fully decided what I'm going to do on the roof. I'm thinking about maybe shingles, but the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put a doorway and some wooden beams here, and then I will be able to grout and what have you in between, plaster in between. And I'm going to make use of the cardboard. This cardboard specifically here. So my plan, if it works, which hopefully it will, is to do simple things like this. So here we have a tab. You can see that if I cut up this in this way, it's already got a bit of a texture which can be painted as wood. There we are. I want that to be about 4 centimeters high, so 1, 2, 3, 4, so cut it across there. You can see I'm doing this very, very basically. The reason why I'm doing these so basically is because I want you to see just how easy it is to do this. You don't need to use special skills. Measuring is good, but it's not always necessary. You don't even need a hot wire cutter. You can cut, and I did do some cuts just with a sharp knife. So just don't feel like you can't make terrain just because you don't have all the special tools or lots and lots and lots of skills. It's just a case of giving it a go, frankly. So we've got ourselves a doorway anyway, there we are. So we'll put a little bit of PVA on the back of that. I'll use a little scrap of card to spread the PVA out so I don't get it on my fingers. And that's that. Our door is in place. So we will then be able to paint that when we get to it. We can paint that to look really nice and look like a wooden door, just with a bit of brown paint. And it really is as simple as that to start dressing up your building. So what I will be doing now is cutting out bits of wood, bits of cardboard, and I'm just going to put an upright here, probably all the way down, probably the width of that, I'm not sure, maybe not, I don't know. One down the middle at least, and another one there. So there'll be 3 uprights, and they'll be the same on the other side. I'll put a couple of windows here. I also need to put some cardboard to fill in under the eaves, which I will also do. And then yeah, we're nearly done then. We're going to be very close to actually doing the texturing and putting the filler on, which I'll probably just use some plaster of Paris or some mix up my own polyfiller from Dry Mix, which is just something you can get from any hardware store, spackle as they call it in the United States, I believe. So yeah, so I'm going to have a little bit of play around with this. I won't run the camera the whole time, so it'll be very, very, very repetitive, but literally all I'm doing is cutting out bits of cardboard, sticking it where I want it to, and move on. And yeah, so if you're building along, or if this is giving you some inspiration or some encouragement, please let me know in the comments below. It would be nice to hear if this message is really getting through, because it is something that anyone can do. Well, there we are, that's good enough, I'm happy with that. And I thought I'd just quickly film now, just to show that what I've done is I've got a pot of these pins, just normal drawing pins, and I've used them to hold in place the beams that I'm sticking on. This is going to be good because they can look like nail holes, so that you can make a benefit out of that. I've also used some clamps to clamp on the windows that are around the base. A way of getting around having to do this would be use hot glue, obviously, but I'm not a big fan of hot glue, so I've decided to try and do it without, just to see how it works and to demonstrate that. But obviously with hot glue there'll be no warping and no bending going on, and it will just dry on very, very quickly. So if you have this problem and you want to use hot glue, but that's gonna be fine, I think, that with the pins. I'll pull them out when it's dry. I'm gonna leave that all now to go off, come back to it tomorrow probably, or maybe later this evening if I get time, and I will do the rendering and then decide what to do on the roof. I've not yet glued anything underneath just because I can't get access to it now, but I will do that. I'll bring you along when I do that to show you how I'm going to go about putting some kind of like shuttering underneath the eaves, just using cardboard again really. And then we'll think about the roof as well. So yeah, cracking on with this, I'm enjoying this now. Okay, so it's the next day and everything is stuck down fine apart from this one, which I was careless when I pulled the pins out and it unstuck, but that's fine. I've pinned it back on, glued it again, and that'll be okay. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start working on the actual rendering of the outside of the building. Now I'm going to be using, let me just pull this into shot. I'm using this, which is polycell. It's basically a gap filler, which we use in the UK a lot, and it's what I've got. Now you can use anything you want. You can use plaster of Paris if you want to. You can use a modelling compound, you can use Sculptamold, whatever you have to hand. But the idea here is that we're going to paint this all over all of this model, not the roof. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix in a colour, some paint. And I'm going to mix in this paint, which is called Africa, which is a kind of dusty kind of pinky paint, which will give it a nice colour, so I don't have to worry so much about it chipping because it's mixed into the actual plaster, and therefore if it chips it will still be the same colour. This is done in a 2:1 ratio, so 2 parts of the powder to 1 part of water. So what I'll do now is I will quickly measure that out, add some paint and mix it up, and then I'll show you how I'm going to go about applying it. So let me get that done. There we are. So I've made up probably a bit too much actually as it happened. Just remember you can always add water, but it's very hard to take water out. And I've ended up using more than half water, so a slightly sloppier consistency than they say on the packet. However, that's because I want it to be a bit easier to actually work with. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this tongue depressor, or it's just a wooden spatula basically, to spread it on and apply it all over all of the exposed polystyrene that we have. And this will give it a texture and also give it a little bit more strength and ability to survive knocks. So I'll do that and I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. The idea being that where that cardboard is now is where windows are, and I'll be able to detail them up next. Now I still haven't done the detailing for underneath the eaves, and the reason for that is I want this to be in underneath those eaves to be giving some support and structural integrity, so I will add the eaves after this step. I'll show you that. That was a decision I made. So yeah, so we'll just do that. It's a very simple process. Just take your time, don't feel rushed. If you need to move the model around, you can. If you need a smaller application device, you can. If you want to use your hands, you can. I might end up doing that. I'm specifically not doing it now because I need to be able to operate the camera, and I have just broken the corner off, which was a bit clumsy. However, I will build that into my design. I was thinking about having a damaged roof. Now I know where my damaged roof is, but I've not got to the roof yet. But yeah, that just shows just how delicate this polystyrene I'm working with is. It's far more delicate than I'm used to. Anyway, I'll carry on. I'll run the camera for a bit and pop some music on so you can see, and then yeah, I'll finish it off and show what it looks like when it's done. But you can already see the effect that I'm going for and how nice that looks. So there we are. I have quite a lot left over, and while I've been doing that, I've been having to think about what might be possible for me for the roof. So we're going to have a bit of an experiment live on camera. And for this, you'll need the rest of this paste and also a toothpick. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll slap our paste on the roof. And this will need painting to make it a different colour from the walls, but that's fine. So let's get a covering on the roof. If you're more sensible than I am and you don't overmix, it might make sense for you to do this in 2 batches. So do one side and then the other, because it'll make it a bit easier for you to manoeuvre the building. Right now, I'm going to struggle to pick this up and avoid damaging what I've applied, which was a bit silly. But you can just literally pull it down in a classic fashion, as if you were actually doing real rendering, real plastering. We'll try this on one side, and if it works then I'll mix some more up and I'll do the other side another time. My thinking is I'm going to try to actually sculpt in some tiles. If it doesn't work, I'll cover it over with a thatch or something like that. And this is something else to realise. It's your model. You do what you want with it. Okay, now I'll grab myself some toothpicks and we will try to do a little bit of sculpting on that. So let's see how well that works. Let's see if this fails. The other thing to say is this is actually quite a good way of... Oops, I've touched it. Careful, Andrew. Put your finger on the wood. There we are. It's actually quite a good way to do... to do thatch. So that's not going to work, I don't think. So let me just show you how you could go about doing thatch in this way. To do thatch, you literally just scrape down, and that will probably work a lot better. So let's do that. Let's just do thatch. So all you do with thatch is you cover it with whatever you're going to use. I've used filler, or I've used all sorts of things, and then just scrape all the way down in short strokes like that with a toothpick, and you get a really nice thatch effect. It's the quickest, easiest, most effective thatch effect I've ever found. That was out of focus for quite a lot of that. I was too busy scraping and not looking at the camera, but that shows you just how well that comes out. So I'll let that dry now, and then I'll mix up a small amount, do the other side in exactly the same technique, and then I'll bring you back when that's done to show you how I go about painting it. But I'm actually very pleased now that I've done that for the roof. That looks absolutely wonderful. This has been left 24 hours to dry. It's still quite delicate, so just be aware of that. If you are using that poly filler, it can be a bit delicate. So what I'm going to do is I've got this kind of reddy brown that I like quite a lot. I'm going to use that as my base colour on my thatch, and am I ever glad that I went for the thatch. So yeah, I'll just paint this all over the whole of the thatch on both sides, and when that's dried then we'll be able to come in with some washes and some dry brushes and vary the tone. But it's just a nice reddy brown. It does a good base for thatches. I'll get that done, and then I'll bring you back when I come to the next step. This is looking nice. This next step depends very much on what material you use to do the cladding. Now, because I used the filler, which isn't all that solid, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to paint PVA over the whole of the model, just like this. This will give it a little bit more strength and will mean that I can handle it a little bit with less worry. I possibly should have mixed PVA in with my plaster, and then I wouldn't have had to do this step, but I forgot, so here it is. The step after this one is going to be another bit of cardboard being stuck over the top of the beams, because they're a little bit flush now, and I would rather that they stood out a bit more than they do. When I do that, I will also work on the areas under the eaves with the cardboard, and then it will be a case of finishing off with the dry brush on the top, and we'll be pretty much done. Unless I decide that I want to paint the walls a bit more. Maybe I might come in and paint them with the same colour that I mixed in, just to give it a bit of a better finish. This might dry a bit shiny. So yeah, a bit of a step that maybe wouldn't have been necessary if I hadn't forgotten to mix PVA in with my plaster, but it is what it is. It won't take very long. I'll leave it to dry for 24 hours again, so I'll come back to this tomorrow evening. And yeah, a bit frustrated that I have to do this, but I'd rather it survived than rush. I will stop filming now because it's just going to be that for a few minutes, and I will bring you back when I come to the next step. Now what we're going to do on this, now that it's dry, is we're going to glue the eaves on. And I'm going to use hot glue to do this. And what I've done is I've got a section of cardboard, and that will be good because when it paints up it will look a bit like wood. This being a very basic build, obviously, that will be sufficient. So you can see that what I've done is I've cut the cardboard into a shape, and I've cut it so that the lines are coming outwards. If you can see that, let me lift it slightly so the light's on it a bit better. So the lines are coming outwards, and that's because that's how I've got it on my house. The way that they have done all of our eaves and underneath there is with the wood going away from the building. So I will now cut and glue on the other end, and then the thing which I'll do once I've done that, just to show you, that's now dry, is I'm going to put another piece of card that looks exactly the same in the same shape over the top of these card sections, and that will mean that they will stand a little bit prouder and they'll look a little bit more like beams. So I'll get that done. I will also use hot glue, and I will bring you back when that's finished for the next painting stage. So I've just finished putting some more cardboard on these elements so they stand a bit more proud, which I think looks really, really nice. So what I'm now going to do is come along with my brown paint, which is raw umber from Winsor & Newton, and I'm going to paint all of the wooden elements. So that's not these windows, obviously, but it's the beams here, it's the door, and also the sections underneath the eaves. And to do this, I almost always paint out of the lid of the paint box, because it means if I knock something over, it's not going to cause a problem. This is quite thick anyway, so it doesn't matter. But for looser paints, I shake the paint pot and then use the paint lid as a dry palette. So what I do normally is I use very little paint. I try to anyway. I'll put paint on and then I'll come along and I'll take it off, because then you get a little bit of a better kind of effect of wood grain than a solid lump of brown, because it shouldn't be a solid lump of brown, really. And you can use your brush to kind of draw shapes in, which then just adds interest. So I'll do this on all of the bits that need to have wood, and then when that's done I'll bring you back and show you how I'm going to do the windows. And then what we're left for is dry brushing the roof and building the base. We're doing really well here. This is looking well. It's basic, but I'm pleased with it. Alright, let's have a look at this roof. I'm not going to do too much to it, to be honest, but what I do have is a very, very dried up yellow paint here, which I probably actually need to just put a little bit of liquid in even. It's probably too dry even for a dry brush, so let me just quickly mix that up. There we are. And what we'll do is we will get ourselves a dry brush and very lightly come along and dry brush over that with this kind of, it's a very, very dark yellow actually when it's dried. Don't worry too much again about making mistakes like putting too much on in any one place, because what we're just trying to do is add some variety. We're not actually dry brushing as such, as rather like bringing in different colours. And you can actually do this with pretty much any colour you want, because if you look at an actual thatched roof, it's not red or brown, it's green and blue and yellow and orange and purple and all sorts of colours. So you almost can't do it wrong, because you can just say, well, that's what my one looks like. And that's my kind of hobbying. So there we are, simple as that. Quick overbrush with the yellow, and to be honest, that's the look I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a particularly old thatched roof look. I want it to maybe look like it's a year or two old, but this is quite a substantial building, and so for the settlement that it exists in, I'm thinking that maybe they rethatch it relatively often to keep it looking nice. So there we are, that is the roof. What we'll do now is we will look at the windows, and then we will look at the base, which we do need, and I'll show you why when we get to it. But yeah, let's have a look at the windows now. Again, this is a very basic build. It's designed to add interest to your battlefield, not to be photorealistic. So all I'm doing is I'm coming along with the same yellow, using the brush that I used to reanimate the paint, and just applying a bit of a glow. And when you look at that from across a table, that will look like there is a fire going on inside, which is what I want. So what we'll do now is we'll do the rest of the build. So we have a couple of windows under here, which I can get to. And all we're doing, as I say, is giving the impression of a fire going on inside a nice, warm, welcoming building. And then we'll be done. Very simple. Then we'll look at the base. Obviously that's the bit that I'm most interested in. I'm most excited about. Excuse me for the brief interruptions in focus when my hand got in the way of them. There we are. We have our windows done. So now let's put this to one side and start on the base. So basing. There's a couple of reasons that I'm doing this. First of all, the method I used for making the plaster is not very hard wearing, and so it will chip and it might cause problems. It might also chalk onto any base, onto any kind of like terrain, other terrain, and this will also just make it look nice. So I can actually just extend it a bit and make it into a little bit of a nicer display piece. So the technique I'm going to use, I'm going to put the cardboard on the bottom to make it again more hard wearing, and then I'm going to put this level of soft XPS on, or EPS on top, and then I will stick the actual building on top of that. So the first thing that I'm going to need to do is actually make sure that the EPS is not wider than my bit of cardboard. So I will probably use my hot wire cutter to cut this, but what I'm going to do is mark a line down here and a line down here, and then trim those edges off, or even more sensibly a line down there and trim that edge off, and then that means that this cardboard will be the same dimensions as the foam. Once that's done, I will glue the foam to the cardboard and then clamp the cardboard to this underneath here, this solid bit of wood, and that will stop it from warping, and it works really well. And I've just done a video on this which had a very good reception, so thank you everyone that watched it. But that will mean that I have a really easy, really solid base that I can then put the grout over the top of to make it really hard, or maybe even some toilet paper and glue. I'm doing this really low tech. Next time I come back, most of that will have been done. So this will be clamped to the base and will be glued correctly, and then we'll be starting to do the actual scenicking. So let me get that done and I'll bring you along when I come to the next step. So there we are. Now we've got a little bit of a camber coming up, a slope, and you can see that this fits very nicely, will sit very nicely on like that, and I'll be able to do a little bit of a wall along this section, a little bit of wall along the back section, and then slope up to the front here and slope up to the front there. Now the next thing that I'm going to be doing is gluing this down, but before I do that I'm going to clamp in place the cardboard to make sure that it doesn't warp. And that's another reason for doing what I've just done, because I'll use a lot of clamps but this will work. I can come along here and just grab the end of the cardboard enough to prevent it from warping. So let's get that done. I have one too few clamps immediately to hand to complete the whole task, but that's done. So there we are. So I'm going to tidy up, get the final clamp, and I'll bring you back for gluing the building into place. So we're set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue it down using hot glue, which is a material I don't use very often, but in this build I'm using a lot. So, and this is one of the reasons why I don't all that stringiness. So I've got my hot glue gun. We'll just run a bead all the way along, all the way down. Perfect. So that is now glued in place. I now have no more time, but we'll be back later to do the terrain details, which I'm going to do, I think, with toilet roll and PVA glue to show how to make use of all sorts of materials. Yeah, that's going to look well. So let's work on the terrain now, on making a hard shell, making it a little more hard wearing before we actually do some actual scenicking. So what I've got here is my terrain glue, which is pretty standard stuff. It's PVA and water and a bit of washing up liquid all mixed together to make a watery PVA mix. And here we've got some unscented, which I prefer, unscented toilet roll. Of course, if you want to, you can use scented toilet roll. And what we're going to do is a pretty standard non-revolutionary technique which anyone can do and which works really, really well. So load up with PVA, and this is one of the reasons why we really do want to prevent warping, because PVA is something which shrinks, and not just that, it also is, this is a very wet mix, and so it will also warp traditionally as well as shrink warping. So what we'll do is we'll slap a load of PVA on over everything like this, and then when you've done that, we'll take some rolls of some sheets of toilet paper and press them on. Okay, and then come on over the top with some more, and just keep building up the layers. Now you're probably going to end up with at least 6 or 7 layers of loo roll to make it really solid, and you certainly don't need to put them on in squares. And what you're trying to do is lose that pattern, so try to mush up and smudge up the actual toilet paper while you're doing it, so that you lose those patterns. But of course you can always come over the top with them, which we will do with more terrain after we've done this. So yeah, we'll be putting some sand on and what have you, showing you a few other techniques. So yeah, just build this up and until you're happy with a thickness of about probably at least 5, if not more, till you get bored basically. I will bring you back in when I'm done and show what it looks like. So I'm just going to sit here, pop some excellent YouTube content on from one of my excellent people that I follow, and keep sticking toilet roll to my base. Well, there we are. I'm going to go put this somewhere warm now to dry. I may come in and do some more layers on it after it's dried, but certainly I'm going to let this dry first of all. I did just want to point out one other thing, that you don't need to use a brush all the time. It makes it easier to apply the glue, but you can sometimes get quite a nice effect coming in and smoothing with your fingers. Now the other thing to say is, this is not the most efficient method you're going to find. If you can get hold of some Luke's modelling compound or some sculptor mould or something like that, then that is better, obviously. However, if you don't have it, then this is going to be perfectly satisfactory. It's just a bit slower. So yeah, this build is all about making use of what you've got to hand, and if you don't have anything more advanced to hand, you'll probably have some toilet paper and you'll probably have some PVA. So I'll let this dry, and then we'll do the next step when it's ready. This has dried nicely, the cardboard, and it is a nice firm surface. What I'm going to do now is another stage which will both add texture and increase the strength of the building. So what I'm going to do is, I've got my terrain paint here. There's a video linked in the description of every one of my videos showing how I make it, but it is basically house paint mixed with PVA and water. And we will paint that on, and we paint it on quite thick, and particularly if you're painting it over something like this or Luke's modelling compound, it needs to be quite thick, and you need to work in small sections because it dries fast. This does dry fast, it's thirsty. Luke's modelling compound and what I'm using here is thirsty. Then I have some sand, which is just builder's sand that I've sifted to make it fine, and I sprinkle it over. And that's it. Once you've sprinkled it over, you can leave it a very short amount of time, like that, and then tip it up. And this is why there's paper underneath. And what you're left with is a nice texture which looks like dirt and also will dry rock hard. So I'm going to get the whole of that done in this technique. I won't film it because it's very repetitive, and then when that's done we'll come to the flocking. So I've left it overnight, and that is now relatively dry. As you can see, I've also taken off most of the clamps. This will now stay pretty secure, so I don't need to worry too much about that. This next bit is a bit of an option. You don't have to do this. If you want to have that sandy kind of pale colour, then don't bother, or paint it with terrain glue to seal it down would be an even better idea, which is just PVA water with the washing up liquid in it. However, I like to have a slightly richer colour, particularly for this type of building. So what I'm going to do now is come and carefully paint over the top of everything with the same brown. Now this will add the colour, and it will also seal this layer, so when we come to do the flocking, we aren't disturbing the sand and getting it mixed up in our paintbrush and what have you. it is a good idea. It is an option, as I say. I would probably seal it with at least with watered down PVA or watered down Mod Podge, or you can paint it to whatever you want your colour of your ground to be. So I'll get that done, and then I'll set it by the fire again. It's cold and wet here, so it won't dry very quickly, just naturally. And I'll bring you back for the next step, which will be flocking. I said it was going to be flocking, I know, but I realised actually, kind of changed my mind. I do actually want to have this a darker brown colour. So yeah, let's get this done, and I'll bring you along for the next step when I get to it. Right, we're coming to the end of this build now, which is really cool. I've really enjoyed it, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the flocking and run the path and what have you, and do that sort of thing. So to do that, I'm going to make use of homemade flock and not shop bought, though of course you can use shop bought if you wish. This homemade flock is made simply using the technique of sawdust, which you can get from any hardware store. Go in there, ask them where they go and cut their wood, and say, have you got any sawdust, mate? And you can almost certainly guarantee that they're throwing it away, and they'll be happy to give you bags of it. Mine is safe for my own workshop, but yes, you can get that from any hardware store. And paint, which is just house paint, and then mix that with water and glue. It's a very simple technique. You can make loads of it, and the reason why I like it is you can get any shade you want, so you're not limited to the shades that you buy. I've not yet worked out a way of making my own static grass as such, but yeah, that's how I do my flock. So while I'm talking, what I'm doing is I am painting on some terrain glue, scenic glue, which is PVA mixed with water and a little bit of dishwashing liquid. And this is how I do my flocking, which is quite a simple technique. I'm now filling while I get to the edge of there. There we are. So what we're going to have is we're going to have a path down here, so we'll avoid putting flock on there for now. And I normally do either a 2 or a 3 colour technique. First thing I do always is I scatter on my dark shade of flock. So I'll put that on not massively thickly, but I do it as a base coat over everywhere where I want to put my flock. And the path is going to curve around like that, so we'll also use this to define the path. I'll come in very shortly and do the path in the same clip, so we'll do the path together. So we put the darker flock. You can see already it's giving a nice mottled appearance. Generally I deliberately leave patchy bits and do it not even, because the world is not ordered and randomness is part of it. Next I come in, this is actually called, the paint I use to make this is actually called grass, and it's a lovely bright one. So I use this very sparingly, but it gives a really nice contrast to the darker green and the brown that will also be showing through. But I do use it sparingly, like I say, because it can overwhelm. Finally, what I'm going to do, or next what I'm going to do, is a mid-green. There we are, that's coming along really nicely. And then I'm going to get the same sand as I used for the underneath. Now I sometimes use a thicker, so a larger sand, a larger grain sand, but in this case I think I want to just use my finest, and what I'm going to do is where the track is, I'm going to scatter that over. And that will make it look, I may come in with a larger grade of sand as well, but that will just make it look like a path going over mud that maybe they've just thrown some sand on, literally, like I'm doing. It's quite an easy technique, it doesn't take long, but it ends up looking really nice. So once you've finished this, once you've done everything you want to, and what I normally end up doing is another over scatter over all of where I flocked of the first colour, the dark one, just to tie it all together very, very lightly, because yeah, it's just how I do it. There we are, just a little bit just to tie it together. That will need to be left to be dried, and then we'll come back and we'll coat it again with some more of the terrain paint, and then we'll be finished. Now I need to decide if I'm going to do any static grassing. My feeling is not, but I might come in and do some longer grasses. If I do, I'll bring you along for that, but otherwise all it'll be is another coat of the paint and we are done. So this is done. Now I do just want to point one thing out in the in the interest of being honest. I did do a little bit of a boo-boo. I put this too near to the fire, and it's actually completely cracked this pine shelf that I was using, which is annoying because I was going to use this pine shelf, actually as a shelf, and now it's probably a bit bent to use, but maybe I'll be able to salvage some of it, and that probably has then warped the base. So if you're doing this, make sure that your thing that you're attaching it to doesn't warp, and clearly this kind of cheap pine is not a good option. So let's see whether we can extract this off the base, cut it down, and then actually finish the project. So we'll take the clips off, and I'm expecting to have to use a knife to separate this from the base in places because some glue got over, but I don't think it's going to be too hard, hopefully. There we are, that actually wasn't too hard. I thought it was going to be for a second there. So I will move the shelf out of the way, and then we'll cut this out and we'll see just how unwarped it is. That is impressive. Like I say, I managed to warp the actual underneath, so we've got a little bit of a warp here, which is frustrating, but that's because the actual thing it was attached to warped. If that had stayed solid, if I'd used particle board and not put it quite so near the fire to be impatient, then I think that would have been absolutely perfect. So what I'll do now is I'll get my knife, I'll cut this out, and then I'll bring you back for a final show and tell, and then we'll wrap this project up. Well, there we are, video complete. And as you can see, the Theoden is stood in front of his great house cheering the Rohirrim on to victory. So I've enjoyed that a lot. It's really good to recycle, to make use of the cardboard a lot more. I had a bit of a reaction to my anti-warping video with some gatekeepery types who were complaining about my use of rubbish materials that aren't suitable. But I think you can look at this and you can see that actually, you know what, that's absolutely fine. It's going to be perfect. The least hard wearing part is actually the roof. And that's not cardboard, that's using a very traditional method of filler, which I just didn't add PVA to. So yeah, it's nice to have successfully made something with materials that most people would throw away. If you've ever done anything like this, then please do let me know, I'd love to hear. So there we are, that's what it looks like, it's done. So there you are. It is perfectly reasonable to make good tabletop quality terrain, and that is good tabletop quality terrain. It's not fancy, it's not going to be good for a diorama, but it's certainly good enough to take photographs against and to plonk down on a table and play around, and we're here for fun. And you can do that using cardboard and very low grade XPS that you get when you buy something and it comes shipped to you, and that stops you from throwing it away and saves you money in the process. So that cannot be a bad thing. Don't listen to those gatekeeper types who say that corrugated cardboard is not a suitable basic material. I think I've just proven that it is, and hopefully this will encourage you to give it a go yourself and see what you can come up with, and saving money and the environment at the same time, so you can feel good about yourself. Anyway, let's wrap that up now. As I always say, drop a comment below. Thank you so much for watching, really do appreciate it. And please do stay healthy, stay safe, and stay well.